Today we have a new vehicle for Toyota. This is the bZ4X. Can you guess what that stands for? Nope, me either. I have no idea. I had to look it up. According to Toyota, it stands for Beyond Zero Emissions, 4 stands for 4 doors, and X somehow stands for electric. Now, despite this relatively bad name, this isn't actually a bad car, although it does have one major flaw. And we're going to find all of this out today by taking a look outside, inside. I'm going to show you some of the features and technology of this vehicle. We're going to try and cram a bike in the back to see how usable this SUV is. And last but not least, we're going to take it out on the road to see what it's like to drive. Let's start first with the exterior. This is seen here in supersonic red. And let's be honest, this is actually a pretty modern and edgy looking vehicle. I've actually been surprised at the amount of people that have commented on it or at least been interested in it. I don't think you see a whole ton of these on the road, so when people do see it, there is quite a bit of interest. Now, going back to that modern and edgy design, I think the front looks really cool. I like what they've done with the headlights. Not super big fan personally of the black plastic cladding that they've kind of put on the sides, but it is at least integrated to the front and back and a bit cohesive with the black roof. So I do like the fact that they're playing off multiple colors here and at least breaking up some areas of the car that's not just otherwise all red. I would love to hear what you have to think of the styling of this vehicle in the comments. Leave a comment below about the bZ4X. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue now, does it? Now, under the hood of electric vehicles, we usually can't see much. In fact, often under the hood, we would call the frunk in terms of the front trunk because it's typically some space that you can put some luggage or something like that. But this vehicle, actually, we can see some of the electronics that are going on here. And being that this is, of course, an electric vehicle, we have 2 options for a 1-motor and a 2-motor. We have a front-wheel drive model and an all-wheel drive model like this one. They're around 200 to 215-ish horsepower, depending if you go with the front wheel drive or all-wheel drive. So if you get the 2-motor, it's 2 80-kilowatt-hour motors. And also the battery. This is really, we're already kind of getting into what I think is maybe potentially the biggest limiting factor where someone would want to buy this vehicle, the range. If you get the front wheel drive model, 250 miles of range, which is already not super great, but if you're getting the all-wheel drive limited model like this, 220 miles of electric range. That's not a whole lot. And as we know, a lot of Americans are concerned about electric vehicles for having that range anxiety. If you're interested in the spec 72-ish kilowatt hour batteries, what is all powering this? And besides that, I'd love to see kind of them integrate this a little bit better so you do get a traditional frunk like a lot of electric vehicles in these days have. Hopping inside the bZ4X, they did really depart here from the traditional electric vehicle in this day and age in that they made this feel pretty familiar. This feels and operates like a more traditional vehicle. There's not this giant iPad that they seem to put in every all-electric vehicle these days. This is more traditional. You have your infotainment, you have some buttons here for your HVAC controls, and while I should say they're not buttons, they are haptic feedback, and they're always here on this panel. They're fixed, so you don't have to go digging through a menu to adjust your heated seats or your temperature. So I do really like that. The drive modes are slightly weird when you get in the vehicle, but you get used to it pretty quick. It's just a push down and turn to the right for drive and push down to the left for reverse. I'm not sure why you can't just turn it right and left like a lot of cars, but you get used to it pretty quickly. There is a lot of piano black in here, which is not great, specifically here on the door panels and this center console. So it's gonna, smudge up and swirl up. That's not ideal, but I do like some of the other textures in here, specifically the dash has this fabric on it, which is really cool. And it also slopes down. It feels like a relatively low dash line, so it has a little more of an airy feeling to it than it otherwise would. You do have some soft touch pieces here in the center console and the door panels itself, although I will say that the storage for things like drinks isn't great. You do have some down here in the door card, but it won't fit a Nalgene or anything like that, and you're certainly not going to fit that in the center console. My biggest complaint with this interior, because overall it's pretty good, is this gauge cluster and steering wheel situation. If you watched my Prius video, it is the exact same setup, or seemingly the exact same setup. Essentially, the problem I have at 6.1 is that in order for me to get the steering wheel to a comfortable point for me to drive, I cannot see majority of the gauge cluster, including the speed. And that's a bit of a problem. Now, some people in that video said, well, just lower the steering wheel and then you could see it. Well, if I lower the steering wheel, I will go directly into my knees. So I might have to cut off my legs in order to do that. And I just think in this day and age, it's kind of ridiculous that there is some sort of compromise and that we haven't figured out how to be able to see a gauge cluster in this day and age. I mean, even Honda at one point had one that the gauge cluster and the steering wheel moved in unison, which is pretty cool. But regardless, most vehicles are fixed and I can see them no problem. Now, maybe if you're shorter, this will be less of an issue and maybe you'll be able to see through the steering wheel. I cannot. So my recommendation just to you is, before you just order one of these because you like the way it looks and you want to have an electric vehicle, make sure you sit in one and make sure that you can see that gauge cluster. Seats are actually pretty great. Heated and ventilated, nice soft touch material, some sort of leatherette, and they're supportive while still being comfortable. They are powered in the driver's seat and manually operated in the passenger. And then the back seats, fairly usable. I can sit behind myself at 6.1 and have headroom back there, just enough, but enough to be able to sit back there on a decent sized journey. And I also have a little bit of leg room as well. So overall, this is a very positive space on the interior. And like I said, I like how the fact that it feels normal and traditional. So let's try and throw a bike in the back to see if it'll fit.
The bZ4X was a bit of a surprise when it came to the bike test. Most small SUVs require the removal of the front wheel in order to fit a bike in the back. That is not the case here. My large frame road bike just fits without any disassembly. This is pretty on par with what you'll find with something like a CR-V, although it doesn't have quite as much room width-wise as something like a RAV4. As always, if you enjoyed the bike test, make sure you're hitting that subscribe button below and leaving a comment so you don't miss future videos.
Taking the bZ4X down Lookout Mountain. It's funny when you get in electric vehicles, they all start to feel very similar. And that's of course because in a gas engine car, there's so many different types of engines, right? There's 3 cylinders, 4 cylinders, 5, 6, it goes on and on. And there's very different characteristics of those engines, turbocharged, naturally aspirated, and transmissions amongst them. Cars can feel very different from a driving perspective. But when you get in an electric vehicle, yes, you can have more powerful motors in one more than the other, but it all feels the same. If you get in a Bentley electric vehicle or you get in a Toyota electric vehicle, they feel very similar, or if not the same. And it's interesting because when you have that situation, you have to step out, or you have to be a part of another vehicle to stand out in other ways. And I think the way that Toyota is trying to stand out is classic Toyota. It's pretty conservative. And what they're doing different here from an electric vehicle perspective is mostly just the interior and driving experience. When you get in a Tesla, Model Y, or you get in a Mach-E even, they have these giant screens. It feels a lot different than your traditional driving experience. Some of them have, hands-free keys, use your phone for a key. What's good about this is that it's approachable because this feels like any other car. If you were sort of muted or put earplugs on and you drove this car and you drove RAV4 or something like that, if you didn't know it was electric and one was gas, one was electric, you just wouldn't really be able to tell by the driving experience very much. I mean, there are some cues, of course, but if you're someone who's not super in tune with that, this would just feel like any other car. And what I say when I talk about that, I'm also talking about the programming of, the brake pedal and the throttle itself, the way when you come off throttle, it really just kind of coasts with a little bit of regeneration, quote unquote, off pedal, just like you kind of would if you let off the throttle in a gas car. You know, it's in gear, it's taking up some of the speed for you. It just all feels very similar. And we already talked about how it all feels very similar in the interior as well. You don't have a giant iPad, it just feels more traditional. You know, there's a regular start-stop button. It's just all kind of familiar. And I think that's a smart thing for Toyota to do. As more and more people adopt electric vehicles and they don't know about them, they want something to feel familiar. And this definitely achieves that. Now, what about the rest of the car? Because like we said, with electric vehicles, they all start to feel the same. Well, in terms of the suspension, it's actually quite good. It soaks up bumps pretty well. A lot of cars these days, you know, just have like as much wheel as possible. Fortunately, there's still a decent amount of sidewall in these tires. Soaks up big bumps, small bumps really well. It handles really flat. It's a little bit, I mean, certainly the steering wheel is completely numb, but in terms of the directness, it's relatively direct, and there is quite a bit of body lean when you like kind of really push it in these corners compared to a lot of other electric vehicles in this class, but it does feel incredibly capable. Like, now I'm starting to put my foot down here. It does that thing with all-wheel drive electric vehicles where obviously you can torque vector, you know, put power to whatever wheel it more or less wants. And because of that, it's like supremely capable of getting around a corner. I mean, genuinely, if you brought up like, you know, pick some expensive car like a Porsche, you know, a regular 911, a Cayman, and you kind of had like a toge up this road, I don't really think it would be able to get away from you. Like, the power is immediate. It has insane levels of grip. It's pretty quick. You know, it's 214-ish horsepower. It feels like more than that, especially given the weight of this vehicle. In certain big moments, you know, if I try and carry some speed through this 180-degree hairpin here, you do feel the weight. It does kind of wash out, but I mean, it drives really well and relatively quiet. There is a bit of a road noise when you're kind of on the highway. No wind noise at all, really. But going back to the power output, I think it's completely adequate for this class of car. We already know that electric vehicles are extremely quick. Like, they're all really quick, and this all-wheel drive one is no exception. What is the problem with this car, or what do I think its biggest weakness? You know, we've talked about its range. I really think it's not necessarily even the range. I think it's just the price. And why do I say that? Because look at how popular the Nissan Leaf was. The Nissan Leaf had like, what, 100 miles of range or something like that? And certainly degraded much less than that. I think it might have even been like 80 or 90 miles. I don't remember, but it's less than half this range. But look at how many people bought Leafs. Like, a ton of people bought Leafs. And that's because they were really cheap. The problem with this vehicle is that, okay, it has like some of the worst range in the class at 220 miles, but it's not cheap. It's just as expensive as those other models. So if they wanted to be competitive, I think there is a space for a electric vehicle with 220 miles of range. You know, it's great for running around town, your day-to-day commute, but you have to make it cheap. You have to make it desirable in some way. For this price or less, you can get a Model Y, you can get a Mach-E, you can get an Ioniq 5, and to me, those are more compelling cars for many reasons, but also they all have better range than this. So it makes it really hard. There's nothing here that stands out enough from those vehicles to justify getting this over those, when once again you're sacrificing big time on range. And then of course with Tesla, you don't have the charging network. So that's where this car is very difficult. I would say overall it's a good car. There are some oddities. I can't stand this gauge cluster. I can't see it. You know, this piano black plastic. I'll show you guys a photo. I've had the car only for a week, and you know, haven't gone off-roading or anything, and there's just dust all over this piano plastic. It looks awful, so you would literally have to wipe that more than once a week for it to not look awful.
Everything else, it feels very similar, like I mentioned, to something like a RAV4, and that will be appealing to some people, but this just doesn't do enough for me to justify $53,000. That's a ton of money, and you can get a lot of car, even at the base level of this car at 43, which starts at the front wheel drive model. Yes, you get a little more range with the front wheel drive model, but I just think that's really expensive for what this is. So not a bad car. It's more so just not positioned well, in my opinion. So if it was cheaper, I think it would make a lot more sense. Let me know what you think in the comments below. It does look pretty cool. I'm not a big fan of the way the Mach-E looks. Model Ys are literally everywhere. I do really like the way the Ioniq 5 looks. This does look a little different, but it just doesn't do enough for me to really justify the cost. So like I mentioned, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let me know what you think of the looks, and also let me know what you think of the overall package. This just feels to me like Toyota is behind in the overall electric vehicle space. Basically, you have them excelling in hybrids, and they've excelled in hybrids by making really simple hybrid systems that are effective, but technologically wise, with all electric vehicles, it just feels like they're behind, and that's just how it is right now. So we'll see what they have in the future, but I appreciate you guys watching. If you made it this far in the video, thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.